We're just 10 weeks away from Election Day 2024. Former President Trump and Vice President Harris will both be on the trail this week, making their pitches to undecided voters. Monday, President Biden is expected to join the vice president on the trail in Pittsburgh, and Trump is expected to begin his week in Georgia for a town hall in the city of Braselton. In TV interviews this week, both the former president and Vice President Harris were confronted about policy shifts. Vice President Kamala Harris, in a CNN interview Thursday, faced questions about her policy shifts on banning fracking and decriminalizing illegal border crossings, both positions she took during her first presidential run. Meanwhile, Donald Trump faced questions from media and conservatives over abortion. On Thursday, Trump said Florida's 6-week abortion ban is too short and signaled he would vote to overturn it, but Friday he reversed course. So how will these policy shifts impact voters? To discuss, we're joined now by Isaac Wright, founder of the Rural Voter Institute, and Rina, Shah, political strategist and founder of Relax Strategies. Thank you both for joining us here on Scripps News. What do you make of the policy shifts we've heard this week from both Trump and Harris? Isaac, I'll start with you.
Well, I think we see with Vice President Harris somebody whose values have stayed the same. As she said in her interview this week, her values have always been the same. She has looked at effective ways to do this. After all, on the border, she is the only person from a border state who has been a prosecutor, who has taken on international crime syndicates that were trafficking guns and drugs and humans across the border. She is prepared to do what we need to do to secure the border in a humane way that keeps to our country's values. On the contrast, we've seen Donald Trump, who I'm not even sure anymore what his position on reproductive rights are. It's changed so many times just in the last week, which is the classic Donald Trump for decades. Somebody who puts his finger in the air to see which way the political winds are blowing. Because the one thing we can be assured of is whatever Donald Trump's position is this week, it'll probably be different by the time the week ends next week.
Rina, your response and thoughts on the shifts we've seen from both Harris and Trump?
Well, I think this past week indicated that Trump is got bigger flip-flops than Harris. And I'm trying to say that objectively here because when you look at exactly where they've changed their positions or how they flip-flop, so to speak, you see that Trump had a bigger one with abortion. He also lost the support of a prominent pro-life, anti-abortion activist. And that activist, Lala Rose, she tweeted that movement, the pro-life movement, should not feel obligated to vote for Trump. So in politics, we all know you got to turn out your base. That's the first rule of thumb. And after that, you've got to enhance. In order to win, Trump has got to broaden the coalition of voters. And I'm not just, in this moment, I'm not sure he can even keep his base when he's having so much trouble with the issue of abortion. Within 24 hours, he had to come back out and reaffirm that he would take a more conservative position on the amendment down in Florida. J.D. Vance had to go out there on Friday morning, just the morning after the Harris-Walz sit-down with CNN, which was pretty big. And he had to answer for Trump's flip-flops. So I'd say it was pretty big. But touching on that interview for just a moment that Harris-Walz did, and Harris, she came out and she definitely changed her position on fracking, which is very important and all-important Pennsylvania, we know, but she didn't quite explain her evolution as well as she could have. She still has time for that. But going back to my original point, the flip-flops weren't as severe for Harris as they were for Trump this past week.
And although the economy remains the #1 issue for voters, more and more voters in swing states especially now say abortion is also central to their decision this fall. For women under 45 years old, in a new New York Times Siena College poll, that shows that abortion is now almost as important as the economy for that group of voters. Rina, how should Republicans take a collective stand on abortion at this point in the campaign?
This is a very simple answer for me. Republicans need to stop talking about abortion. They keep putting their foot in their mouth every day of the week they talk about it. And it's a losing issue for them. Look at Ohio, look at Kansas, where it ended up on the ballot and Republicans lost. So in essence, what Republicans really need to do is keep going back to that original point that Trump was using months ago, is that it's been decided by the Supreme Court. It's back to the states, and I have nothing more to say about it except for I will not sign a federal ban on abortion. That's where he ought to keep it. But look at this past week. Again, Republicans, Trump downward, putting their foot in their mouth on abortion. It's just not smart of them to talk about it at this point in time. They need to hammer Harris on Bidenomics because that's where they show they have the more salient points. They need to hammer her on immigration. That's where they show they have their most salient points and could perhaps really move the needle in those two issues. But when it comes to abortion, look, it's been decided. Women are galvanized by it, particularly those of reproductive age, women like me who have children but are still pro-choice for other women, even though I'm anti-abortion for myself. I mean, it is an issue of freedom here, and freedom is the cornerstone of the Harris campaign. I mean, she's got the song from Beyonce blaring at every rally to prove it.
And Isaac, we know that point, the Harris Walz campaign launching a 50-stop reproductive rights tour across the country, talking about protecting freedom for women's reproductive rights. Do you see that as a signal that Democrats think abortion is the defining issue in the campaign right now?
Donald Trump is who made it the defining issue when he pledged he would stack the Supreme Court to overturn Roe versus Wade, and that Donald Trump would be personally responsible for taking away women's reproductive health care choices in America. And that's something he did. And now we are left in a world where a woman's reproductive choices are not between her and her doctor, but they are made by government politicians. And that's wrong. That's morally wrong. And that is something that Harris and Walz have said they're going to stand up to. Donald Trump can't undo the damage he's done. It's going to take a real leader like Vice President Harris. And that's what you see that focus on the campaign about right now. People are ready to see that clock reset, to see a change in people's rights and people's freedoms. And that's what I think you see Harris and Walz pulling so much energy out there on the campaign trail talking about.
And as Rina said, when abortion is on the ballot, people show up to vote, and the nation is largely in support of abortion rights in some form or fashion. Now, Rina, many national polls have Vice President Harris leading Trump by a small margin. Most of the polls have that lead within the margin of error, so really a tie at this point in many polls. What does former President Trump have to do to make inroads, especially in battleground states at this point in the campaign?
That's a great question. You know, the statistical dead heat that Harris and Trump are in right now continues to mystify a great many political insiders, because the momentum that Harris gained right after she got the endorsement from Biden in the aftermath of him dropping out really was unlike many could have predicted. And of course, this past month in August, what we saw was the wind at the backs of the Harris Walz ticket. Not only did they have this really successful convention, the optics of which looked really good, what we're looking at now is a sense that, wow, she's been able to break that ceiling that people had for her, probably wrongly, but she is still the sitting vice president of the United States, and that's always an entryway in which the Republicans can say, you are part of the governing administration. We want to have a referendum on you and what your administration is doing. Even though the vice president doesn't quite govern, she's still tied to this administration. Earlier, I talked about Bidenomics, and in this interview that she did this past week with CNN, Harris didn't do a great job of divorcing herself from Biden's record on the economy, and she didn't really quite say how she'd be different. So that's something she's got to do, because that's where the Republicans have the best choice and can make the most headway in breaking her away from this lead she's got in certain polls.
I know we still have much more to discuss, but we're out of time for today. Isaac Wright and Rina Shah, we appreciate you both for joining us on Scripps News Weekend, and we will certainly have you back to discuss next time.
Good to be with you.